on this computer. Here we go. Thank you all. Allison, take it away.
Hi. I apologize for my voice. I am homesick with the flu and lots of congestion. So I know I sound very congested, so I apologize. I teach at Fishers Junior High, which is in Hamilton Southeastern School District. It's a suburb just north of Indy. And I actually went to that school. And then I came back. I played softball at IU, where I got a double major. I'm actually a social studies and math secondary licensure. And then I came back and filled a maternity leave for a teacher, and math position opened up, and I took it, and I have been there for, this is my 21st year at the junior high level. So everything that I am sharing today is all stuff that works at the junior high level for my classroom, but I also feel like it is something that could be adapted to any grade level. The biggest thing is just that passion piece. So when David and Donna reached out to me and asked if I was willing to do this, this is definitely outside of my comfort zone. Like, I have no problem talking to 13 and 14-year-olds all day, but a bunch of adults was a little intimidating, if I'm being honest. And I don't want to come across in any way, shape, or form that I know more than any of you, because I don't. I am a big proponent in listening to people that are passionate about what they do and finding ways to steal it and use it in my classroom. And so I truly hope that's what this is for you guys. It's just a chance for me to share kind of like what I've done, why I do it, what benefits I've seen for it, and then kind of give you some things to think about. And I definitely want to leave some time for Q&A at the end, because I think that's the most valuable piece. So I almost envision this as kind of like a show and tell of things that I have done over the last 5 to 10 years, my favorites of things that I have done that have really worked, and how I was able to tie in that community civic side with math education, which sometimes people don't always see how the two could relate. I'm going to attempt to share, and then I want to make sure that everyone can see this all right. So if I share but don't put it in presentation mode, it just makes it easier for me to toggle. Audience members, can you still see the slides well enough? That thumbs up. Okay, perfect. So my ultimate goals for today are really just to share the why, like, why have I decided to do this in my classroom, share out stories of what has worked in my classroom, and then I also, just as I said, want to definitely give a chance for brainstorming. I was trying to think back, like, when did this really transition happen? And it happened about that 10 years in. So I'd been teaching for about 10 years. And by then I felt like I had the math teaching part down much better. Like, I was more confident in the teaching aspect, but I still was constantly getting the question that I'm sure a lot of you have gotten before. Why do I ever need to know this? How is this going to be used in my life? And I felt like I was doing an awesome job at that. I felt like I always included a real life example in my notes. And I felt like every time the kids asked me that question, I'd pause and give an example. And I was constantly like, what am I doing wrong? And after reflecting, I was like, okay, they're not experiencing it. They're not really seeing it, and they can't make that connection. And so I always do an end of course survey that is basically just like, what activities worked for you? What was your favorite thing we did in class? How did you like my Canvas page? All that sort of stuff. And I always put on a question that this class is relevant to my life. And sadly, I would get 15% say agree. And the majority would always say disagree. And so when I made this transition and started doing more of these type of things at least once a 9 weeks. That's always my goal. Although when I first started, it was once in the year, then it was once a semester. And when I started making that transition, when I did the results, like I had to run down my principal because I'm like, 80+% of the kids said math is relevant to their lives. Like I was jumping for joy. And when they wrote down what are their favorite things we did in class, they were referencing these sort of activities. And that's when I kind of felt like, okay, I have found something that is making the kids engaged and making them want to learn the material and learn it well because they're seeing that it's relevant to something they might be interested in outside of my classroom. So I do a hashtag, it's all over my room, seeing math.
I'm
Like
laughing.
that's my big thing is I want kids to see math everywhere. We do a seeing math project each semester in my honors algebra class, um, where they get to choose, but anyway, we do a ton of that. And so the fact that the kids were starting to really buy in was very rewarding. And I had siblings, and it's so funny because when I'm like, okay, we're gonna do this, and literally this year, one of the kids was like, I've been looking forward to this since my sister had you. Like she came home and told us all about this, and I have been waiting to, and I was like, you're my hype person. I need to like record you for every year. So just to know that the kids really do appreciate and go home and talk about it, like that's what keeps me motivated. That's what keeps me trying to find new things. Definitely, I have a couple of favorites. I have some I cycle, and in no way, shape, or form am I saying this is something I do every month, every week. This is more things I do, as I said, about once every 9 weeks, just to kind of bring everything together. So I thought I would kind of go through a timeline. So the very first one I ever tried was where I was able to put on my old social studies teacher, government, political science thinking cap with my math teacher thinking cap. So I had gone through and I had looked at the algebra honors algebra standards, well, the algebra one standards for data and statistics. And there was a lot about being able to read two-way tables, being able to interpret data, being able to read graphs and make conclusions. And it was just lots of that sort of stuff. And I'm like, okay, how can I bring this into something that they might be interested in? And so I thought, well, let's run a campaign. And so they were trying to get the first year, it was very generic. It was they were getting either the principal or the vice principal elected president of the United States. So in order to do that, I we went through and we looked at like electoral college data. We looked at exit poll results, which are given into a data tables. We looked at the trends of different groups and how different groups vote. We looked at how women vote versus how men vote. And my principal is an African American woman, and my vice principal is a Caucasian male. So when we were looking at demographics, like, and how women tend to decide, then they were like, oh, I think they're going to vote this way. And it was like, okay, but can you defend it? Like, you got to come up with the reason. Like, you need to find the data that supports that. And so, again, I just tipped this was my first attempt at doing anything. Like, I was just dipping my toes in the water, but the kids got so into it. Like, they made posters and they had done their research and they were super excited to share out. Can you believe, Mrs. Stroll, that this percentage of this group voted this way this year, but then a different? And I was like, okay, they're actually like getting into this. They're looking into it. And so I decided to then build off of that. And for the next couple of years, we did political war rooms. So the kids would be broken into teams. And at the very beginning, we kind of did um, we did a test that sort of says if you lean more towards the Democrat or the Republican, but actually it was a test for all different political parties. So like you're more the Green Party or different things. So it was just kind of like because junior high kids, basically, if you ask them, what are you? They're going to say whatever they hear at home from their parents, or they're going to say the exact opposite because they don't want to be anything like their parents. Like, but they don't really have any background on it. So I just kind of wanted them to see. But ultimately, that test meant nothing. They got to decide. And I said, okay, you are either going to be hired by the Democrats or the Republicans, and your job is to come up with a targeted approach to determine what swing states you are going to spend the most money in. And you are going to then also have to determine where you're going to spend what population you are going to try to target with your ads. And so we're going to do like an actual war room type thing. And they would go on. And I mean, this is them looking at exit poll data results right here. It was a big culminating unit that we had done over just all data analysis. And now they were bringing it all together and making this presentation. Well, I'm talking to 7th and 8th graders. They don't know what the Electoral College is. They don't, they think every vote actually is electing. Like, they have no idea that sometimes the person that gets the most votes isn't always the person that wins the presidency, and that because of the Electoral College, like, they don't know any of that sort of information because they don't really learn that till they get to high school. A little bit in 8th grade. If it's an election year, they'll do some of that. But I teach a class that I did this in, which is actually 7th and 8th graders mixed. So it's any kid taking Algebra 1 at the junior high level is doing this class. And so it's always like, I mean, the amount of information that we have to first build up that isn't necessarily math, but they're going to use their math lens to analyze it. And so I love that. And this was something I was passionate about. And this was something that I was very interested in. Like, I would be a government teacher if I wasn't a math teacher and loved my job. Like, that is um, the reason I became a teacher is a social studies teacher, and she's the department chair for the high school. And she has literally called me multiple times saying, I've got a teaching position at the high school for you to be a social studies teacher. And I'm always like, is it all government? And she's like, no. And I'm like, okay, well, then I'm still good teaching math. And she kind of knows that. Actually, she did call one year and she's like, it's all government. I still turned it down because I was like, I love math. So she's kind of given up on me by now. But I do love that aspect of it. And so then they came down and they really went with a lot of that interpreting the data and making it. And once they figured out what a swing state was, it was funny because a couple kids were like, that's why when I lived in Ohio, it was like every second there was political ads on, and they're like, it's more than in Indiana. And I'm like, well, yes, but do you understand? And it was so cool for them to figure that out. So then I just threw up a couple of different, so then they had to come up with a PowerPoint presentation. They had to present it to, I got a panel of judges. We have a We the People class at our school. And they are like 5-time state champs and 3-time national champions at the middle school level. So they're pretty passionate kids, and they're all in my math classes, either as a 7th or an 8th grader. And so I got their teachers to come judge. The principals came and judged, and so they went through their presentation. And it was interesting because the kids were like, well, if I'm going to be the Republican and I'm going to target white males. And I was like, okay, how do you think you can maximize how do you think that's your money being spent well? Have you seen it? Do you feel like there's more white males you can attract besides what? And they were like, oh, so that, like, because this percent vote, I'm like, yeah, you already are kind of maxing out that percentage. So it was just really good for them to think through all of that and really take a deep dive in. And so we went with that. We did that multiple years. It was really interesting. The kids were so into Indiana. They always wanted to go back to the one and only time Indiana's gone blue. And they wanted to look at those exit poll results because they wanted to see what groups, like both whoever was representing the Democrat or Republican, they all would go back. I mean, we were prepping for the 2020 election, and they were wanting to go back to the 2008 election because they still wanted to see what groups had switched, so that way they could see if that was targeted. And to me, that is the true, they're reading the data, they're interpreting it, they're analyzing, they're making connections, it's become real to them. Like, they're invested in it. I will be 1,000,000% honest. After the 2020 election and the controversy around it and the community and our state and the dynamics, I was like wanting with everything in me to still do this unit because I felt very passionate about it, but I was not touching it with a 10-foot pole as far as we were not going to try to target. We were not. So I was like, okay, how can I still do everything that I know the kids are going to get into, but how could I like tone it down so I don't get any hate mail from anyone saying I'm doing anything that I'm really not doing? Because I still felt like it was very valuable, but I also knew the temperature of the current situation, and it just wasn't worth it to me. I had a conversation with my principal because I was even nervous to do just the unit in general and looking at the exit poll results and everything, but she was fully supportive of it. She's like, I got your back. And I told her kind of where I was going, and she was in full support. So I pivoted. We did everything we did mathematical wise. We did everything we did leading up to it. But now it was all of the lessons, like how are votes calculated? What does your voice matter? All of those were things they were looking at all along the way. I just pivoted and took it a different way where I said, okay, we're going to look at, it was the year that they were redrawing the maps for Indiana. And I'm like, okay, here's another perfect chance for them to, there's actually some really cool websites I found that show the math, how they calculate whether a district in the map is a competitive district. And so the students got to see what the maps looked like all along the way. And I reached out to Todd Houston, Speaker of the House. He is an HSE grad. His wife was my varsity softball assistant coach when I went to HSE schools, so he knew me. I reached out to Representative Jeter. He graduated. He was a year ahead of me and was an HSE grad, and he played sports with my husband. And then I reached out to Senator Codora. So these are all three people that represent portions of my school district. So a portion of who they represent is part of my school district. So I wanted them to see, like, these are people that represent you. And I reached out to them and I just explained what I was doing. And thankfully they were all on board. And so I asked them, I'm going to give the kids two options. Option one is they can come up with a social media, like how to get the vote out more, because we had also seen that not as many people had been coming to to vote. And so that was one option after looking at all the data. How could we just in general get the vote out? Like, what demographic do you think is underrepresented? And obviously they quickly realized young people don't show up to vote. It was very obvious. And so that intrigued them, and they were totally on board for and they were figuring out, what celebrity could run the commercial, but they got to go that route. Or the other route they could go was, after doing this, they could write their representative and ask any questions they had after doing the unit, ask about how the maps were drawn, why they were drawn the way they were drawn. It became very obvious that some of the maps had been drawn differently, and it was making where we live more one way than the other. And so I never brought anything up, but the kids, as they're looking at the maps, like, Mrs. Strole, it used to be stripes in all these areas, and now it's all reds and one blue and one stripe. And I'm like, Okay, so what do you think that means? Like, why do you think that happens? What do you,
What do you mean?
and so for them to get to then write a letter and ask their representatives all of this sort of stuff, that was really cool. And I was very appreciative that all three of them, I do know that some of them got letters, that wrote the letters, got letters back. Um, Todd Houston made a video for the kids. Senator Kadora made a video for the kids. And then Chris Jeter wrote them a letter just in general. And so it was actually fun as I was getting this presentation together. I went back, so kind of more of the logistics of it. So this is my Canvas page back from 2021, which was the first year I did it this way, that I had transitioned away from the election. So you can see that I just built a module and they work through it. So they got to who is the winner, and it was it's all a it was a Desmos activity that they work through, where they get to look through different concepts, and then it had links to different places and all of that sort of stuff. And then in that I was able to they were able to hear their messages from the representatives, and then that was where this whole take action, and this was where they were able to submit their letter or their PowerPoint presentation. And I didn't realize I could still pull them up. So when I was looking, I was like, oh my goodness, I can still pull up the kids' stuff. So I just thought I would do a quick. So this is just an example right here of how they picked an underrepresented group in their opinion, and they made a PowerPoint presentation of who they were going to target, why. They pulled graphics, they pulled 2A tables of data, and they made a presentation. And then right after, thankfully, the very next person, they wrote a letter. And so this was her letter, and she was a Muslim American, and she chose to write to Senator Kadora, and she was asking how we could get Muslim Americans more involved in the process. And I do know she got a response back. So she was very excited about that. So that to me was like my very first attempt at making the math be a little more relevant. I could have given them a bunch of graphics and just said, can you answer these questions on it? And it could have worked, but I chose to go this route, and the responses at the end of this year when I've done these have always been, we love this. Like, this is great. So that was like my first, but I will be honest, the amount of legwork to do this was a lot. And so I was like, okay, I'm the only one who teaches this class. I don't have enough time to do all the research, to find all the websites, to find all the resources, to do everything by myself and do this on a regular basis. Like, I have to find something that could help me out. And so I was just Googling and different things, and I came across Mathalicious is what it was called at the time. It has now been rebranded to Citizen Math. I am in no way, shape, or form saying you have to use Citizen Math. I am just sharing out that the rest of my examples are all based off of Citizen Math or Mathalicious lessons that I took the data from. So I love this site. I'm going to share it at the end. It does come at a cost. I paid for it out of pocket. The first year I used it, my principal found out, and she was like, this is crazy. We love what you're doing. You're not paying for that out of your pocket. And they found money so that I could still continue to use it. I have found value in it. I am sure there are other resources. I've got another website that I know could get some stuff to you, but for me, to, in all honesty, it was worth me paying the couple $100 for a year for just the sheer amount of time it was saving me. I could type in a topic of interest and it would show me lessons that were already aligned to state standards. I could type in a state standard that I thought would be interesting to try to do a deep dive on, and it would give me a list of topics that they already had pulled all of the resources for, video clips, different things. And so that to me was beneficial. And if you guys find other sites or different things, then share with each other. Selfishly share with me if you find something, because I'm always looking for new ideas also of places to go. But that is the one thing, like, I just want to be honest. When you do something like this, it is more time consuming than just rolling out a typical, like, hey, we're going to do this lesson and then we're just going to take a normal quiz over it. And so because of that, I wanted to make sure that I had a place that I would maintain it, because I knew if it took too long, like, you know, us all, or at least me, I get busy and I'm like, oh, that was fun, but I'll just do something else. So that was my caveat. Okay, so then the very next time I was like, okay, I love that. I've been doing that one thing plus these seeing algebra projects. I was getting comfortable. I'm like, okay, I'm ready to branch out. I want to try something different. So the very next thing was our school system was looking at flipping start times. So historically, our high schoolers went first, our elementary went last. And so they were looking to do the whole flipperoo. And I thought, oh my goodness, this is something the kids are passionate about. I got to find a way to tie in the math. So I went to Citizen Math and they had an amazing lesson, but it was a trig lesson. And I'm like, yeah, no, I teach honors algebra. Trig, I'll be honest, I don't even know that I understood all the math that was involved in it. That's been a really long time since I took that class. But I was in the functions unit. And one, for me, a standard for 8th grade algebra was that kids could analyze different functions using appropriate vocab, like relative maximum, absolute maximum. This section is where, this domain is where it's increasing, and this domain is where it's decreasing. And I'm like, we can totally look at the circadian rhythm. I can even show them the fancy formula that created this, that they have no idea what the math is involved in, but we can totally use our math terminology and vocabulary and analyze this graph appropriately. And I had reached out to our school board and I had said, hey, I want to do this. Here's my idea. Would you be willing to partner with us? Like, just, listen to the kids. If they were to write a letter, would you be willing to, like, acknowledge you got their letters, blah, 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 blah. And they went above and beyond, which is the other thing I would tell you. I was nervous to reach out to community. And every time I've reached out to community, they have exceeded my wildest dreams in what they were willing to do. So fast forward, they said, I reached out to the president of the school board. She said, absolutely. They made a schedule and they made sure that every single period of the school day, sorry, that there was at least one school board member in the room. So it wasn't only they were going to read the letters at the end, they were in the classroom, like talking to the kids, like listening to them. So then I was like, oh goodness, this is a little added pressure because now they're going to see how well this lesson does or doesn't work. And this is the first time I'm trying this lesson. So as we're learning the vocab, I said, hey, FYI, you are going to have to be able to use this vocabulary on the spot, guys. Like, you are going to see a function you've never seen in your life. And you are going to have to be able to analyze it and speak appropriately. And I said, you're going to have a voice at the table on whether or not school start times are being considered for flipping or not. And they're like, they're not really going to listen to us. And I'm like, yes, they're coming to our classrooms. But I promise you, if Johnny says, well, I don't want to flip the start times because I don't want to go to school that late, or I want to flip start times because we get up way too early. Like they're going to listen to you, but it's an opinion. But if you can state facts, whatever you think those facts are, if you can speak well and use data to support it, they're going to really listen to you. And so by saying that, I mean, the kids were so into the terminology. Like that, I actually was able to do it 2 years in a row because after the whole thing was done, they couldn't agree on whether or not to flip it. And they thought it was too late in the school year to flip it and not give parents enough time for whatever. So then we got to have a whole discussion with the kids like, well, here's real life. Like you did, because they were really mad. Like, we did all this work and they didn't even vote on it. I'm like, well, that's kind of how life works. And so I got to do the lesson a second time. And I will hands down say that that year was like those 2 years. I mean, they knew that vocabulary like forward, backwards, every which way, because they knew they were going to have to use it to state their opinions. And so this is just some different pictures. That is the school board president at the time. That was our superintendent at the time. He also came. I did a little survey at the end, and shockingly, we were in favor of keeping us going early. We weren't in favor of flipping either year. I think we were just for our comfort. I think if I were to do the same thing now, I've always wondered, I'm like, maybe I should pretend they were rethinking about it and just to see if the results would totally flip, because I feel like they went for what they're most comfortable with, was also weighing on it. But what I want to say is they did end up writing letters.
Okay.
Every single one of those letters was entered into, their names were all redacted. Every one of their letters was entered into the school board meeting. The school board members referenced some of the kids' comments, like one kid had done research, and in Europe, even though you go to school early in high school, they have a nap time. And she proposed that that's what we should do. And I mean, she had done extensive extra research on this. I partnered with the English teachers, so it met their persuasive unit. We timed it where I was going to do this at the same time they were talking about persuasive speeches. And so they wrote their letter, and then the English teachers did a proof of it and gave back thoughts before we sent it over. This was the picture of me getting ready to drop off the letters at central office to the school board. Kids watched the school board meeting.
I know, right?
On the
I
day
think
that
tomorrow's warm but rainy.
they watched the school board meeting on the day that it
That's good.
was. Oh, okay. They watched the school board meeting on the day that it was being voted on. And then we got to have a discussion both years. So the first year they were very upset that it was tabled. And then the second year, it was a great time for us to have a conversation that we both were very passionate about our views. We knew that half the people were going to be happy and half the people were going to be upset because we were a 60-40 split on what we wanted, and how we talked about how hard it must be to be in political office and having to make those decisions, and knowing that they did a decision for what they felt was best, and it made half the people happy, and half of you feel like you've done all this research and you have the best reason of why they shouldn't have voted that way, and they still did. So it was a really good way to kind of come back after and just reflect on it. And so that was the piece that I will continue to say: find things the kids are passionate about, find things you're passionate about, and then find ways that you can tie in the rich math task. Again, I'm not going to do something if it's not, they have to use their math skills and use them well to be able to do it, because I do feel like I'm a math teacher first and foremost. So I need to make sure they're doing that also. But I also want to make sure it's something that will engage the kids. I have found if it engages the kids, they are much more into it. and I get much better discussions, and I get much better results for whatever it is we are going to do. So after that was a success, I personally was hooked. So I'd kind of been doing the political analysis thing for about, I don't know, 5+ years. I then went to this. It was a success. I was like, okay, I'm on. I need to find some other ones. So here are just a highlight of a few of the others I've done that I really love. So this one was systems and solar panels. So our school system has 2 schools that we put solar panel arrays at, and that is what is powering those schools. And it happens that one of the 2 schools is Sand Creek Intermediate, which is the 5th, 6th grade building that feeds to my junior high. And so the first year I did this, I knew that the kids had seen the panels, and I knew they were there. So I reached out to, we have an energy manager at central office that's kind of, he was a science teacher that transitioned into this role. And he's who had to write the grants to be able to get the solar and all of the back end stuff. And so I reached out to him and I said, hey, I want to I found this lesson on Mathalicious, and I want now citizen math, and I want to have them look at traditional energy and the costs, and then look at solar energy and the cost. And so they ended up analyzing and writing a system of equations. They saw where the break-even points were. And with solar, there's 2 options. You can buy or you can lease. So it actually was a system with 3 equations, which we had never done. So that was a good, an authentic, like, they'd never seen 3 before on a graph. So this was their first time doing it, but they were very into it because they wanted to see where it was going to make sense for each of those. And so I brought in the energy manager, actually came into my classrooms that day, and he brought in a sample solar panel, and the kids did all the math. And then I had saved time at the end of the lesson. And then he kind of presented, like, here's the solar panel, here's how it works. The kids got to go touch it and see it and all that sort of stuff. And then he did explain, like, everything you're doing is exactly the sort of stuff I had to do for my grant. Like, I had to have the math, the finances, to be able to prove. And he's like, I was analyzing systems just like you were. And so the kids were like, seriously? And he's like, no. And so he really pulled up the data from his proposal. And he's like, this is how we got the arrays at the 2 buildings. I tweeted about it. My principal had encouraged me to tweet out things more. And so I tweeted about it. Our mayor in the city of Fishers saw the tweet, and he actually reached out to me and said, I would love to send our version of the energy manager to your classrooms. I love what you're doing, and I would love for them to see that not only is the school district looking at this, but so is the city of Fishers, where we live. And I was like, that is awesome. And so we have like a best period at our end of the day, which is like a study hall where kids can go into classes where they're struggling, or for enrichment opportunities, or they can just stay and do traditional, like a study hall at the end of the day. That worked best for him. So I actually opened it up, and I was just like, hey, if you thought this was a super cool lesson we did, then another guy wants to come and tell you how Fishers incorporates it. And so I had said, if you want to give up your best period to come do this, feel free. And I honestly wasn't for sure if very many kids would want to do it. I had standing room only for his for that day. He came in, he stayed afterwards and talked to the kids. The kids were so into it. And again, it was a way for the kids to see, like, what we're studying in C112, my classroom, is actually used outside of my 4 walls, which is a big thing that I try for the kids to realize and understand. And then since then, I thought that might run out, but now our school board over the last several years has been challenging to determine whether we should be adding more solar arrays. And so I have been able to partner again with the school board and the energy manager. And so we have gotten to do this lesson about 5 more times since then, where the kids keep getting to give feedback on whether they think it would be a cost savings and which schools they think we should target, because some of our schools are landlocked and others aren't, and different things like that. And so it's been great. The energy manager has been awesome. They get to write on back to him. They've gotten to see how slow the process is. So he has been working on this. He has made numerous presentations year after year to the school board about it. We're still determining the cost efficiency of it. But it's been like, again, any time for the kids to realize, one, they feel like their voice is being heard, which I truly feel like it is. They continue to partner with us. They get feedback from it, but they're also getting a glimpse into how real life works and how slow or quickly things do move. And so I think life lessons are also being taught besides how does a system of equations apply. The next one, our 8th graders always do a trip to Arlington National Cemetery. And so this is what I choose to do with my 8th grade in the function. So we've just practiced solving equations, and then the very next unit we go into is analyzing functions, and then we transition into linear functions. So it's like that's the area we're in. So right after we finished the solving equations unit, we've just discussed function vocabulary. I love doing this. It's the Arlington dilemma. Again, all the information came from the site, the math, the graphics. I didn't have to go find that. I just determine how I use it. So they get to, they analyze the function and they realize, oh, wow, occupied plots versus total plots, like they're seeing it shrinking. Then they have to write equations. There are multiple different options on that Congress is actually considering. There's options 1A, 1B, 2A, 2B. I did do some research because I was like, is this really happening? And it really is happening. The best thing was after I did this, and I didn't even realize it, the kids came back from the DC trip and they're like, Mrs. Strole, our bus driver was talking about the Arlington dilemma when we went and visited Arlington. Like, he was telling us how they're trying to figure out what they're going to do because they're running out of space. And we were telling him that we had talked about this in math class, and that we thought they should do this part of this plan and this part. Like, we came up with our own plan, and it was so funny. Like, they were so excited because they were on a field trip and it was still being discussed. And so the biggest part about it is obviously they have to write equations, they have to analyze a function. There definitely is a problem. They realize how they choose to tackle the problem. There are 2 very basic solutions. Option 1 is a financial burden, and option 2 is we just limit who can be buried there. And to me, that is awesome. That is as significant as a financial burden. But I know my 7th and 8th graders aren't going to see that. So I have brought in various veterans throughout the years, and they have partnered with me, and they come in on the day of that lesson. During COVID, they made video clips, but they come in, and actually this right here, he is one of my friends, and his actual job is he's who notifies people when their loved ones have passed away, and he's who helps them figure out like where do they want to be buried, like helps the family work through all that. So his perspective has been unreal, and he's partnered with me like the last 5 years. And so at the end, before the kids have to write up their proposal, like they've done all the math, he tells the kids, like, I want you to come up with the proposal that you think will work best. And understand there is no right or wrong reason, but I need you to be able to defend to me so that when I go tell a family member that they can or cannot be buried at Arlington, that you are okay with that decision. And like that is when the kids are like, oh, yeah, this is more than a money decision. And that's where the creativity of the kids pops in. Like he lives it. He's even told some of his colleagues, like, you can't believe like the kids were brainstorming these out there ideas. And he's like, but it was actually kind of cool to listen to what they came up with. And so I love that part. I love that it became real. I love that when they go on the field trip, they actually see it. I love that the bus driver that I don't even know told them about it. Like, so it moved beyond just a math lesson Mrs. Strolle's making us do. Um, I feel like I have been talking a lot and I apologize. This next one is one of my favorite, um, all-time favorites that I do with honors algebra. So we first semester doing systems of equations and honors algebra. We start second semester with exponents and exponential functions. And so at the conclusion of that unit, we do this activity, and it is literally the week before they have to sign up for high school classes. And this is my favorite lesson, one of them, but it's my favorite lesson from a parent hat perspective. So my son also took this class when he's now a freshman in college, but when he was an eighth grader, he took this class at my junior high. So he went through all these lessons too. And that year, I brought in the guest speaker I brought in was actually a college admin person that had been a high school teacher, then went on to higher ed, was a professor for a while, then had transitioned into college admissions. She's since started her own company. But she came in and I was like feverishly writing down notes from what she said. So basically, what the kids do, they analyze a system, they see what would be 4 years post high school if I went straight into the workforce, like welding or something that just requires a high school degree. You know, they had to calculate what would their net earnings be at 22, and they were given, we lived in the world of average salary. And then they got to go find their dream job and see where their dream, and they all were laughing because they're like, Mrs. Stroll, a teacher is below the average salary. I'm like, yes, thank you. I do know that. But so they did that. And then the same thing, we looked at the average cost of college, including room and board. So we did have a discussion like, this is average cost with room and board. We also talked about how scholarships are out there, and but this was a pretty average rate. So they realize, you know, you're quote unquote in debt this much money after 4 years, whether that means your parents paid for it, whether that means you took out loans, like how the college got paid for, it still had to get paid for. And then the salary. So they solved the system to see where the break even point is, how far into it. Then, so this is a picture I pulled up this year. This was what one of my kids, this was their system that they wrote. Um, we do a whole project where they build, so they are very good at their domain and restrictions in Desmos. They have to recreate a piece of architecture using systems as their semester one project. So that was them creating that. Then from there, other kids chose to not graph. They chose, so this is a kid calculating it by hand. Then I show them this tweet. And it says, you know, I borrowed this much money, I paid this much, how much do I still owe? And the kid, I love because the kids are like, oh, you owe like $7,000. And I'm like, yeah, no, that's not how much you owe. So then they work through an entire activity where they learn about compound interest, so exponential growth. They see the calculation, they start to figure out, you know, when is it better to try to pay off the loan, but then they also realize where does that mean in your life and all that sort of stuff. And so then that brings us to the guest community that I partnered with. So I partnered with the college admissions person, and then I also use our guidance department. I love doing this lesson right before, sorry, I'm having technical difficulties. Okay, I think I'm back. I do this right before they schedule because I want them to realize that, the takeaway is kind of that college is expensive. And so we luck out that our school system offers a tremendous amount of opportunity to graduate high school with a year plus of college already under the belt if they choose. You also have to understand I'm doing this lesson with my honors algebra class. So these are seventh graders in double advanced math and eighth graders in single advanced math. So they are in this class for the sole purpose of they can take calculus either their junior or their senior year, getting a college level course in high school without having to double up on math in high school. So I knew the audience I was also speaking to, that this would be a group of kids who could get college classes and probably be successful in them. Um, and so it was amazing. Like I had, and so anyway, we did this, they learn about the compound interest. Then she came in and I didn't know the difference between AP classes and dual credit classes as a parent 6 years ago. And I learned a ton, but I also got so many emails from parents saying, yeah, my kid came home and they said they're going to take a year off after high school and they're just going to work a job. Or my kid came and I was like, oh great, what happened? But the parent was like, so we said, oh really, why? And they said, well, we did this lesson in math today, and I mean, the parents were like, they talked us through everything and they realized how expensive college was going to be. And they didn't want us to have to figure out how to pay for all that. So they were going to work for a year. And that way they could help because they knew if they had to get a loan, they wanted to be able to pay it off sooner than, and it was just like, again, whether or not the kids do that, just their thought was there. And the parents were just like, and fast forward, I will be honest, this lesson stuck with my son because as a freshman in college, and even when he was looking for scholarships, and we as a family had just said, I'm going to try to pay for this without a loan. That's what we're trying to do so that you don't have student loan debt. And because of that, and he knew this lesson, like he's even referenced back to it. Like, Mom, that's why I got a year of college in high, like he graduated with a year of college already done, and he is very cognitive and he has numerous times said, I am so appreciative of, I know how expensive, and I mean, he's an 18-year-old boy. He doesn't thank me for anything. But the fact that that stuck with him, the fact that parents emailed me because at their dinner table, kids were talking about an algebra lesson, like that was enough for me to be like, I'm doing this lesson again. So, since then, I've had the high school counselors come in, and I think it's something like, I'll be honest, I think we have these kids and families scheduling classes, and they don't know, like, until you've had a kid go through high school and into college, like, the kids don't know, the families don't exactly know. So I love the fact that they can kind of see how the math they're studying is applied and then see how at school systems, which I'm assuming Muncie School is also very big school system, probably has partnerships with Ball State and Ivy Tech and other colleges where they also offer courses. And we also had great discussions, because the kids are like, oh, I should take every AP class offered. And I'm like, and the counselor thankfully said too, no, pick the ones you pick the ones you're passionate about. Don't take a whole entirely, like you're a kid still, be a kid. But if you really love math, take the AP math class. If you really love English, take the AP English class. So I think that was great for them. And then last but not least, I am I played softball at IU. I was a varsity coach for forever. Both my boys play baseball. So I wanted to also say you can bring in community members and it doesn't have to be as deep as some of the things we've discussed. This is an example where they analyze what is the easiest and the most challenging ballpark to hit a home run out of. Because believe it or not, baseball is the only sport where the field you play on is not standardized. So, a 3-point shot is a 3-point shot on a basketball court. It's the same. And same thing for if if you're playing volleyball, you can't, I don't know. I'm now talking about sports I don't understand. But anyway, they all are exactly the same. But in baseball, the bases have to be so many, but what is determined as a home run is based off of both of our high schools aren't even the same. It's a different distance to center field at one high school versus the other. And so the kids the question is, should we standardize like if we use home runs as this big, huge thing on who we think are the best players in the MLB in high school and college, should we standardize baseball fields? And so first they just get to use their knowledge of quadratics. They get to calculate, they get to build the green monster wall. That's what this picture is here. That green line was the green monster. And then they see what it took to hit it, and they get to see which fields were easier, which fields were more challenging. And so then I reached out to both high school coaches, to Anderson University's coach, because I had a connection to that person. And then the person that I talked about that had left but was a teacher, college admissions person, now owns her own business. She's friends with the Indianapolis Indians president. So he also partnered, and they all, after the kids weigh in on what they think, then they get to hear from each of the different coaches and the president of the Indianapolis Indians on what they think. And then they get to decide if they would change their mind now that they've heard from someone else. And it's very interesting because they don't all agree. Like some of them say yes, most of them say no, but they say no for different reasons. So I also feel like you can bring in community connections and allow kids to see that connection to the math they're studying in the classroom. And it doesn't have to be earth shattering. I mean, when we were learning what exponential decay was, one year I brought in a basketball referee, and he holds out a basketball and he drops it and he says, we can use this one in the game. Then he does it again and says, we can't use this one in the game. And so then the kids have to work through an activity to try to figure out what determines if a basketball is good or not. Well, really, they end up creating an exponential decay graph. Then he comes back and explains, well, if your exponential decay ratio is right here, it's a good basketball because the basketball has to rebound between, I forget, it's 71 to 79%. So it can be as simple as something like that just intrigues them, or it could be a bigger community issue that your community is focusing on. So I spoke longer than I meant to because now I'm looking at it. So I apologize, but
Actually, Allison, you're right on the money. My computer clock says 5:15. You're right on the dot.
I felt like I talked for 2 hours. So
So let's take a brief pause for just to let Muncie Community Schools teachers know we are at 1 hour, but we can stay as long as you have questions for Allison, and Allison's poor voice holds out. So if you need to run off now, thank you so much for coming. We appreciate it. And for those of you who'd like to talk more with Allison or have a question for her, please stay on the line and go ahead.
Going to end with what I would challenge you to do is first think if this is something you'd want to do in your classroom. Second, who's a colleague that you think you could tag team with, that would also want to do it? Because I think 2 people tackling it is less overwhelming. And then you have 2 routes. You can pick a math standard and try to figure out how could you bring in a real life issue, or you can pick a real life community issue and say, how could I tie in math standards to that? And then the biggest thing would be if you can find some resources out there to help you, that is huge. And so I was going to quickly share the resources that I referenced. So on that, the resource you heard me mention the most was this citizen math resource. Again, I'm not getting paid by them to do this. It's one I use. So if we were talking a lot about 8th grade. So I could click right here, and here is every lesson that they have tied to 8th grade standards. I did this one right here, See You Ladder. I didn't put it in the presentation, but I did it this year with my kids and partnered with our Fishers Fire Department. Where our town is going very vertical. So lots of apartments, lots of businesses with apartments on top of it, hotels being built in Fishers. And so the Fishers Fire Department, they learn the 4-to-1 ratio on ladder safety. And then the kids had to, a new hotel was being built in downtown Fishers, and it hadn't broke ground yet. We were actually the first to know about it from this lesson. But the Fishers Fire Department gave us the graphics, like all the dimensions on it. And they explained to the kids, like, before any new construction happens, we have to have a plan in place. If a fire were to break out on the north side of the building, where would we park our fire truck? If a fire were to break out on the south side of the building, where would we park the fire truck? And they explained, obviously, a car will be parked the wrong way and we'll have to make an adjustment, but we don't want to be figuring that out moment of fire. We want to have a plan in place. And so they said, here's a new hotel. We're actually getting ready to work on our plan. Why don't you guys come up with a plan? So my 4 honors algebra classes tackled it. They all submitted their plans. One of the 4 plans was actually the plan the Fishers Fire Department utilized. Like, they agreed with the math and the calculations. They did a little more geometry than we knew. So they were able to fill in some gaps on why that one was the one they went with. But again, and then we've watched this hotel get constructed. We did at the beginning of the year. We've watched it get constructed this whole year. The kids are like, can you believe that's the window, Mrs. Stroll, that the fire was going to be in? I'm like, well, yes, but let's hope there's not a fire there. But anyway, this is it. The Arlington dilemma that I talked about that's where I found this. It's the Safely Rest one here. And they have lessons from 6th grade to Algebra 2. So I'm not really sure exactly what grade levels are on this Zoom, but that is a great resource, but it is not free. Another resource is this Institute for Mathematics and Democracy. And if you click on education resources, they have a ton of stuff. And one of them is the Math and Democracy Desmos mini units. These are just some I put together for their website. They had asked me to do so. I've tweaked some. It would be a starting place, so you didn't have to start from scratch. Honestly, I did this years ago, and I don't know how. Yeah, those are still the 3 that I based it off of. I'm sure mine have slightly changed, but those are the 3 Desmos that I still use when I do the one I shared at the beginning. So those were 2 resources I just kind of wanted to share with you as a starting point, because I do know for me, once I had the passion, I wanted to do it, the most overwhelming portion was, where do I go find this? I'm not a math expert in everything. I'm not an expert in solar energy or in different things. How am I going to do this and do it well? And I wanted to make it as real as possible. And I'm happy to answer questions. I would love to know if you guys have ideas as you go for it. If you have ideas, then share them with David and Donna or share them with me, because I am always looking for new things to try. And I am in no way, shape, or form saying like that I have even scratched the surface of all the possibilities that are out there. These are just things that worked in my community world and where I was most comfortable or passionate. Okay, I am literally done talking. So it is now your guys' turn to ask questions.
Well, let me just mention a couple quick things, Donna. Maybe we can stop the recording. Now would be a good time to stop it. And then I think we had Allison, so you got invited to a conference in the chat. So I think somebody asked you to come to the Indiana Council for the Teachers of Mathematics conference and